Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're doing something a little different, diving into a stack of source material that comes from a really unique place. We're looking at excerpts from a transcript of a guided hypnotic investigation session.
That's right. So think of this deep dive as stepping into a very specific frame of reference. We're exploring information that's been gathered through a method the source itself actually describes in detail.
Yeah, exactly. And our job here, our mission for this deep dive, is basically to unpack the core claims laid out in this material.
Look at the surprising details, the implications, but all within the source's own framework.
Right. We're guiding you through what this specific source is reporting about prophecies, power shifts, unseen energies, all centered around Pope Francis.
It's definitely a fascinating look at a very particular perspective.
Let's jump in.
Okay, so we start with the central figure here, Pope Francis. The session transcript we're actually drawing from, it's dated April 25, 2025.
And right off the bat, the first key claim from this transcript is about the timing of his passing. It reports that he did not actually pass away on Monday, April 21st, 2025. That seems to be a date the session participants were referencing.
Yeah, instead, the source reports perceiving his actual energy signature much, much farther away at that point.
So what was that feeling people had, that sense of him being close to Earth around April 21st?
Well, within the session, that was identified as something called an egregore, which the source basically describes as projected energy.
Yeah.
Energy created by people's collective grief or, their focus.
Okay, interesting. And here's where the claims from this transcript, they get really complex, quite layered. The source states Pope Francis died much more than a year ago.
Much more than a year before that April 2025 date.
Right. And it even reports several previous moments where there was apparently a desire from, other parties to actually declare his departure sooner, including somewhere last autumn.
Which leads to the next reported claim, that the moment finally declared meaning around that April 21st, 2025 date was chosen because it was, quote, more appropriate.
More appropriate. Okay, let's try and unpack what the source means by that. The transcript gives a pretty detailed explanation, claiming the declared date, April 21st, which symbolically is linked to resurrection, right?
Right. It claims that date was chosen as part of what it calls an esoteric ritual.
An esoteric ritual.
Yeah, and this ritual, the source describes, it wasn't just a standalone event, it was part of a chain of others, linked to many events and rituals, designed to mark essential points in a yearly kind of cycle.
And the purpose, what was the reported purpose of this specific ritual?
To collect energy. That's what the transcript claims. That everyone reacting to the news, whether they felt belief or hate or revolt or joy, everyone was energetically sort of invited to participate.
Feeding this ritual with their emotional energy.
Exactly. Feeding it. The source describes perceiving this energetically, seeing what it has subliminal parts.
Subliminal parts. What does that seem to mean in this context?
Well, in this source's framework, it seems to refer to like a deeper, maybe non-physical aspect of individuals. And these parts were seen kneeling and raising and cheering a figure described as a king on a throne.
But not a single person.
No, not a single entity. It's described as an entire construct.
Okay. And the transcript explicitly states that on that Monday, April 21st, the whole scenario of Jesus' death and resurrection was, quote, remade energetically through this process.
Wow. And connecting this to the present, in the source's view, it claims the large crowds perceived at the Vatican aren't just physically there.
They're also energetically present.
Yeah, drawn by what's described as a kind of magnet or radar, something that identifies people who are focusing on these events.
And this energetic presence, according to the transcript, it creates an interference.
Yes, even causing physical effects on people who are experiencing grief related to the news. That's the claim.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. The source material also gets into interpretations of prophecies.
Right, specifically those related to the idea of the last pope. Things like Malachi's prophecies, Petrus Romanus, the destruction of the seven-hilled city, all that stuff.
So how does this transcript view Pope Francis in relation to those?
According to this transcript, he's seen as facilitating a transition from one religious structure to another.
Specifically linking traditional Christianity with, what, the New Age?
Yeah, through his public discourse. That's the connection the source makes. And it's framed within the source as a necessary process of transformation, where the old structure basically changes its vestments, as it puts it.
Changes its clothes, essentially, metaphorically. So what about the prophecy about the destruction of the seven-hilled city, Rome, the Vatican?
The source claims that's a metaphor, not a literal physical destruction.
Okay, so if it's a metaphor, what does it represent then?
It represents a passing of power. Power moving from the papacy area to other powers.
The Vatican loses its central power.
Yes. Described as handing over the baton, or the scepter, to another power to lead in the world.
And does the source give any sense of what the Vatican looks like after this handover?
It does. It looks quite far into the future. Over 30 years out, around 2055 or so. And it perceives the Vatican itself as being empty, like a museum.
A museum, wow.
Yeah, a space without power, even a little abandoned, where the core energy that once animated it is, quote, extinguished.
That's quite a vision. So this reported shift, this handover of power, what does the source say about the world stage, geopolitics?
The transcript describes the situation as realigning. It calls this period a threshold of passage, a critical moment during the handover.
And this realignment, is it linked to things happening now?
The source suggests it is, yeah.
Yeah.
Linked to ongoing global movements, including elections and such. And it's seen as a kind of neutral territory, influenced by all of us.
All of us, meaning?
Meaning collective consciousness, it seems. Implying that how we collectively focus or think can steer the outcome down different paths.
Okay, which brings us to the really critical question this source tries to grapple with. Who or what is this other power that's supposedly receiving the baton from the papacy?
Right. The transcript perceives this new power not as a single entity, not one person,
But as
a grouping, a collective. It's visualized energetically as a circle of 12 figures, described rather intriguingly as parahumans or even puppets.
parahumans or puppets?
Okay.
And inside this collective form,
Inside it, the source perceives a sphere that feels alive and contains significant information.
what kind of information? This is fascinating.
Well, according to the source, what's really key here is the information it claims is in that sphere. It includes the concept of the extraterrestrial, defined simply as something come from outside the Earth,
Okay.
and the phrase all of us. Both are perceived within that sphere.
Extraterrestrial and all of us. How does the source connect those two ideas?
It claims the influence of this, let's call it extraterrestrial aspect, comes through activating extraterrestrial information. Information that, according to the source, we all came with.
We all came with, like it's innate.
Yeah, described as being present in our DNA,
Yeah.
and linked specifically to the concept of power, our own power.
So the path forward, as presented in this transcript, it involves all of us and this growing consciousness.
Pretty much. The source suggests humans are becoming conscious of being these subliminal parts. There's that term again, that deeper self.
Experiencing life inside a physical body.
Right, and that the future involves learning to access and perceive the world from that subliminal self.
Okay. Now, before we dive deeper into that idea of personal power, it feels absolutely crucial, really important to understand the source's own commentary on the nature of this information.
Yes, absolutely vital. The transcript includes a disclosure section. It explicitly explains the methodology used. And it states very clearly that these kinds of investigative sessions, as single, standalone occurrences, are generally unreliable.
Unreliable. Why?
Because of very high information contamination is the reason given.
Contamination. So how do they get reliable information according to this method?
According to the source's methodology, reliable information is only obtained by filtering for common threads that appear across a very large number of sessions.
And how large is very large?
It specifically states the need for thousands of sessions to find reliable patterns.
Thousands. Okay.
So the source itself, the transcript we're pulling from, it acknowledges that in a single session like this one, the percentage of reliable information is considered very low.
How low?
Potentially less than 3%, with the rest described quite bluntly as garbage.
Less than 3% reliable, the rest garbage. That perspective comes directly from the source itself, providing the information.
Exactly. Which really highlights the importance, doesn't it, of approaching claims from a single session like this with significant caution.
And understanding the built-in limitations, according to the method they describe. It's like a snapshot, maybe, but not necessarily verified truth, even within its own framework.
Precisely. It's presented as a single session's findings with that major caveat attached.
Okay. Keeping that firmly in mind, then, let's go back to the source's idea about activating personal power in this period of reported transition. Does the transcript give a sense of how many people are actually doing that, living in this more conscious state?
It gives an estimate, yeah, a very small percentage it suggests. Around 0.2 to 0.3% are currently living fully activated in this way.
That's tiny.
Tiny. Slightly more, maybe 2 to 3% are aware they have a subliminal part, but very few, according to the source, are actually perceiving from that deeper self yet.
So if someone listening wants to start exploring this path, according to the source, how would they begin? What does it suggest?
Well, the transcript describes it as less about actively doing something specific and more about simply being.
Being. How so?
Simple sensory actions are given as examples, like really savoring life, taking the time to smell a flower, or truly being present when you touch something, feeling the texture.
Grounding in the present moment through the senses.
Exactly. This kind of practice, the source claims, helps people become more conscious of themselves as that subliminal part that's experiencing life in the body. Visiting the body is how it's phrased.
Okay. And finally, the transcript offers a key message related specifically to the figure of Pope Francis and all the surrounding events. What is it?
The message is, let him go.
Let him go.
Yeah. The source explains this is about letting go of our attention being fixed on what it calls this hologram. Remember that projected energy, the egregor we talked about earlier.
Right. Don't fixate on that. Why?
Because, as the source claims, fixing attention on it destructures the being. Or, maybe more simply, it distracts us from focusing on our own selves, our own inner state, and activating our own potential power.
So it pulls energy away from personal development, in a way.
That seems to be the core message, yeah. The value of neutrality, detachment, when processing information like this, even if parts of it seem to confirm, your own intuitions or feelings.
Neutrality and detachment.
The goal, according to the source, is for the information to use us to understand, meaning we process it to gain insight, perhaps see different perspectives.
Rather than letting it consume us or become an object of fixation.
Exactly. Use it for understanding, not obsession.
Wow. That was certainly quite a journey through some extraordinary claims from this one specific source.
Definitely a deep dive.
We've explored these reports about a secret timing for the Pope's passing, this elaborate, energetic ritual tied to that date.
An interpretation of prophecies describing a non-physical handover of power from the Vatican.
A vision of the Vatican's future as basically empty, a museum.
And the emergence of this supposed new collective power linked to innate extraterrestrial information that's supposedly present in human DNA.
But, and this is the crucial context, we also navigated the source's own significant disclaimer about the reliability of info from single sessions.
Yeah, that massive contamination issue, the need for thousands of sessions to find reliable threads within its own methodology. That's key context.
Absolutely. And ultimately, this unique source, it kind of circles back to the individual, doesn't it?
It does, suggesting this period of reported shifts is maybe an opportunity to awaken personal power through simple acts of presence.
And reinforcing that value of detachment, processing information for understanding rather than letting it pull us off center.
So for you listening, after hearing all of this, what does it spark in you? How do you even approach trying to understand claims like these that merge prophecy, energy, consciousness?
And what does that idea of where you focus your own attention and energy mean, especially in light of concepts like these? Lots to think about.
For sure.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into a truly unconventional source. We hope it's given you plenty of unique perspectives to consider.